best. Here he comes, here come the 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 West. Chant at beyond, look around like who's next. I cannot do second best.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Blood the Whistle podcast brought to you by myself, Yannick Noir. Today we're going to be focusing on the NFL in our fourth and long segment. So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss in a bit of detail the wide receiver position. I'm going to go through my top 10. So, this is my own opinion. It will be controversial, and you may not agree with some of the position, you may not agree with some of the players who have been left out, but this is how I see the NFL right now. And before I even get into it, let me just, I'm just going to say that I blended it. I've created this list, and I compiled this list, and it consists of players who have missed the majority, if not all of the season, as well as players right now, and I've tried to judge where they were last year, if they've missed the whole season, and where some of the other players are this year. So this might come across a bit controversial. But before we even do that, let's discuss what's happened in the NFL so far. So let's talk about the end of the season. Obviously, end of the regular season was last week. We've had a few high-profile coaches leave. Chip Kelly left before a snap was taken. The Philadelphia Eagles coach was fired after 3 seasons, and I'm surprised, but it was inevitable because of the way he handled things. He took control of personnel issues and got rid of pretty much all the best players, and it just didn't work out. So you could say it's no shock he was sent back in, but I think he had at least one more season in him. And other coaches have got sacked. Tim Somsula out as 49ers head coach, Tom Coughlin out as New York Giants head coach. There are a lot of coaches who got the axe. So Chuck Pagano, retained, I think, rightfully so, as Colts head coach, because obviously, he was deprived of a starting quarterback, a franchise quarterback for most of the season, and he still got a team to 8-8 and just missed out on the division. So yeah, there's a lot of coaches who have been sacked, and there will be some more coming who will be given the axe coming, over the next week or so. Let's talk about the playoffs wildcard weekend this week, and we have the Chiefs at the Texans. We have the Seahawks at the Vikings. And on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, we have the Packers at the Redskins and the Steelers at the Bengals. So that's four great matchups. All four of those are great matchups. And I'm not going to talk about them in so much detail. I'm going to wait till the divisional round before we talk about the playoffs. But the other teams who've got a byes are the Broncos, the number 1 seed in the AFC, and the number 2 seed Patriots. And in the NFC, you've got the Panthers, number 1 seed, and the Cardinals, who are the number 2 seeds. So let's get straight into it. Yeah, as I said earlier on, when it came to this receivers tree, I decided to, not a receivers tree, sorry, the receivers top 10 list, I decided to, take a few things into consideration. I said, some players have missed the whole of 2015, and, other players who have missed, let's say, like a majority of it, let's say, like players like Les Bryant and Jordan Nelson, example. So I've sort of tried to gauge whatever last year and try to use that, one compare this list. And if you even look at the name of top receivers in the league, I'm just going to go through like a list of this year. It's Des Bryant, Julio Jones, Jordy Nelson, Odell Beckham Jr., Marius Thomas, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, Latavius Bryant, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Marshall, Jeffrey, Calvin Johnson, Sean Jackson, Calvin Benjamin, who's also out injured. You got Mike Evans, you got AJ Green, you got Julian Edelman, you got Lauren Landry, you got Watkins, Lauren Landry, got T.Y. Hilton, you got Allen Robinson, you got Doug Baldwin, you got John Brown. You got so many receivers in this league who can win you games. There are obviously, and it's quite, with so many top receivers. And especially now, it's a very pass heavy league, a league that favors the receivers. It was going to be hard trying to list these 10 receivers, trying to check out power list the top 10 receivers. But I think I've done so, and I think I'm going to give a reason why I've placed each and every player where they are. So let's just start. At number 10, I got the Jacksonville Jaguars, Allen Robinson. Now, you may have not learned. Some of you may not have heard of Allen Robinson. Let me just give you some of his stats. He amassed 1,400 yards, scored 14 touchdowns, which is tied for the most in the league, and had a highest, out of the top 10 receivers from last year, from the season that's gone by. He had a league high 70.5 yards per catch. That just shows you how much of a weapon he's been, and he's been playing for Jacksonville Jaguars. He probably haven't got as much, coverage as other teams. So that alone should tell you that Robertson is a top young player. The Jaguars have a really, really good young player, and the fact that he's been able to perform so well, have a full season on the belt, says a lot. And there's some players who will miss out on this. You may think, why are they not here? And Robertson is, and that just goes to show how much of a talent he is, how much of a season he had. I could not keep him off this list, and I think keeping him at number 10 is a very it's a very justifiable spot for him. I think it's very justified after the season he's had. It's an amazing season. So it's, to have them, you have to have the most receiving yards, to have the most touchdown receptions, and the most and the highest yards per catch says a lot about a receiver. This was an amazing season, and I hope he can build it next season. Can build it next year, should I say? At number 9, I have Demaryius Thomas. You might think this is a bit low, but if I look away from the stats, he's had a season where he's had 2 different quarterbacks. He lost Peyton Manning, or he's had Peyton Manning for pretty much half the season, lost him to injury, and then he's had Brock Osweiler at the helm as well. You would say normally that, okay, maybe that's probably affected his performances or whatnot, but he's still look, watching him play, he's done things like drop key catches, and he's just not been as I think threatening or explosive as it was last year. But saying that, he's still a mass 1,300 yards. But he only caught 6 touchdowns, and as I said, that goes back to them, to him dropping a lot of passes. But Demaryius Thomas is still a very good wide receiver with a good quarterback on the center. You're going to get a player who's got the speed and has got the hands, to make those spectacular catches. But it's just been like this year, it's just been inconsistent. He's made many drops in the games that the Broncos have lost. And Demaryius Thomas has dropped some key passes, so I think that's like a worry for them. Maybe going into the playoffs, will he be able to rediscover that form that made him one of the top, the top 5 receivers in the league in some people's books. So I think him, I flirted with him being kicked off this list altogether for his performance this year, but I think his touchdowns, he's low touchdowns, and he's low and his receptions per yards per receptions can just be put down to a very frustrating and a very stop-start season, especially for the Broncos. So I think with that with that taken into consideration, I think 9 is a very good spot for him. At number 8, I've got Brandon Marshall. Now, I think there was talks about earlier this, I think in the last 2 weeks, about should Brandon Marshall be, inducted into the Hall of Fame when it's all said and done. And I think, he's got a case, not even just for his off the field. So it's a receiver who was called very disruptive. You couldn't coach him, hard-headed, or caused enough issues. But obviously, once people realised why, that he was suffering with some mental health issues, I think people started to understand who Brandon Marshall was as an individual. And as an individual, I think he's an amazing person. What he's done, and I think the awareness he's brought to the game of, for not only players but people or fans who suffer with mental health issues, says a lot about his character. And not only that, he with his partnership with him what's his name? His partnership at the Jets with Eric Decker, you could say that he changed the whole thing, the whole face of our franchise, because this was a team who before he came along had no recognized receivers. Along with Eric Decker, they've transformed the way that this team attacks other teams down the field, especially in the air. So he has, since 2012, he's tied for the most touchdowns since 2012 with Des Bryant, who probably will feature on this list. So that says a lot about Brandon Marshall. Brandon Marshall is this guy, he's moved from team to team. He's went from the Broncos to the Dolphins to the Bears and now to the Jets. He's moved from team to show that he's not been able to have a stable team, should I say. But he's still managed to produce results. He's produced, he had over 1,500 yards this season. He's got 14 touchdowns, which is tied for the most in the league, and has 13.8 receptions per catch. Sorry, 13.8 yards per reception. Sorry. So that shows even towards the end of his his career, he's still able to produce and fight at the top. So I think 8th on this list is a very good spot. And that brings me to number 7. This might be controversial. I think, you know what? Had he been able to play this season, I would have thought Jordan. I thought Jordan Nelson would probably be much higher than this, than 8th, 7th on this list. But his absence alone has, you've been able to see how much of an impact he's had. He had on this, on this team. Like his absence. With his absence, you've seen the way this team has sort of crumbled. The Packers are almost unrecognizable. I think for the first 5 games, they were able to, make up for for missing Jordan Nelson. I think teams just weren't able to, didn't realize straight away, how to attack, how to defend against this team. But once they realized, you got to do is man up against a team without Jordan Nelson, you start to realize that he had just realized just how big of a part he was to this team. He's a player who, because of his speed, like Johnny Nelson, he used to run track, back in high school. He was, Johnny Nelson is no slouch. He can beat coverage. He's very fast. People joke and say, he's fast or white boy, but he's very fast. He's able to demand double coverage. He's able to demand the attention of the safety as well as the corner. So if you've got a deep threat like Jordan Nelson, it allows receivers like Randall Cobb, James Jones, Devontae Adams to be open. But because they don't have Jordan Nelson, the speed of the Packers offense, especially the receivers, has just dwindled. It's dropped. So players are able to beat coverage. And even if they do, we've seen how they don't have the hands. Like Aaron Rodgers has been sacked I think he got sacked 45 times this season, if I'm not mistaken. 45 times. That's because he's had to hold the ball longer because his players aren't able to get free. They aren't able to get separation. If he had Jordan Nelson on board, he's a player who has the speed to beat such coverage. So his absence has pretty much exposed the lack of speed on his team, aside from the lack of speed on his team. And, players such as Randall Cobb who have been brought into, who's been moved out to take on Nelson's role, just hasn't been able to produce. So I think Jordan Nelson, for the impact he had on his team, and, for his importance alone, deserves to be at number 7. And I think if he can come back next year and produce the same results, I think the Packers will return to the same team as they were before. I think Rodgers will be able to go back to, targeting, his best weapon, be able to find his best weapon, or, he'd be able to find more open players as a result of Nelson being on the field. And it's almost like a domino effect. You lose one piece and it affects the rest of your offense. And this is what's happened. So I think Jordan Nelson at 7 is definitely justified. Now this number 6 on this list might sound very controversial. I think this is just my personal view. And although I think this player is very talented, I think he's one of the top players in this league, I just feel that he's got a lot more to go before I can have him, probably in my top 5 or in my top 3. Now, Odell Beckham Jr. has, he's a knack for producing the incredible catches. I think in terms of being clutch, he's one of the top clutch receivers in this league. Because I think when you need him to, not when the game's on the line, not when the game's on the line, when he's down the field, when he's in, it seems as if the catch won't be made, he has the ability to pull out the spectacular. And he's one of those players where I think it's, the play is never dead. If the ball's sailing out wide or whatnot, the play is never dead. We've seen we all remember his one-handed catch. He's become famous for his one-handed catch. The catch has been played over and over again. And he also caught a similar ball against the Redskins earlier in the season, where the ball, he had no business catching the ball when he caught it. But I know people will be saying number 6, why is he at number 6? Why is he so low on this list? Why isn't he higher? I'll tell you why. I think Beckham Jr. is one of those players where he can be frustrated throughout games. He can be frustrated a lot of the times. I said, he has ability to. I think his ability to put out the spectacular is why he's high on this. He's such a top receiver. I think he can be frustrated we saw against the Panthers that he was frustrated for most of the game, not just by Josh Norman, by the whole secondary. He was frustrated for a lot of the game, but then as soon as the defense had a lack of concentration, he was able to take advantage of that, and that's exactly who Odell Beckham Jr. is. He's the kind of player who can take advantage of your mistakes and and pretty much punish you for them. And that's exactly what he's done. He's he said, he's amassed, despite missing one game this season, he's amassed 1,450 yards. So he would have got over the 1,500 yards mark, and he scored 13 touchdowns, and then amassed 15.1 yards per reception, which is which is amongst one of the highest in the league. I think to tell the truth, is is joint second amongst the top four, the top 10 receivers of last season or the season just gone by. So he's definitely a talent. I just don't feel that I can put him in the same bracket as the likes of Des Bryant, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, and AJ Green. I think those receivers are more consistent in the fact that over a game they can keep producing. You can keep targeting them despite regardless of any coverages they might be in. Do you know what I mean? So it might sound contradictory, to what I just said, but I just don't think he's quite there yet. I think had he shown me more this season, shown me more in terms of being able to to perform better against against the tougher defenses. Against tougher defenses, we've seen that he was shut down somewhat. Against tougher defenses, he had a bit more of a harder of a harder job, which is expected. But I just think until I see something like that, he constantly beating the best DBs, and then in the game beating the best defenses in the game, I don't think I can put him in that next group. Yeah, he's definitely in that group, but he's not high against the players. He's not higher than the players ahead of them. Now, which brings me to number 5, AJ Green. I think it's not. I wouldn't say it's hard to say. I think it's easy to say it was a quiet season for AJ Green, but I think he only amassed 86 receptions this season. He only caught 86 passes, but he still managed to get just shy of 1,300 yards. And it's his yards per reception that shines out more. He despite he was I think how many games? I think he missed 1 or 2 games this season. I'm not saying I need to double check on that, but he still amassed 15.1 yards per reception. That's for a player like Green, who missed games, that's really good. And I think his ability to beat top DBs is what I love about AJ Green. I think his size, his speed gives him that edge over someone like Odell Beckham Jr. I think AJ Green is a player who's only going to get better. I think he's not talked about as much as the other top receivers in this league, the likes of Julio Jones and whatnot. He's not talked about as much as those type of receivers. I think he's got a much lower profile, but he does get the job done. And I could have, with him and Odell Beckham, I could have switched him either way. I could have put Beckham over him or below him. But I think the fact that Green, has proven to me that he can beat some of the top receivers in the league is why I have him here. Simply why. I've seen him do something. I think whereas Odell Beckham does the incredible, I think Green, the attention he brings causes so much confusion for secondaries that, and you've seen it. We've seen him go for catches and seen 2 DBs crash right at his leg, right at his knees, and be able to walk in the end zone. And that's just what AJ Green is. I think he's just, like I said, he's just there above Odell Beckham. So AJ Green, it was a decent season. He's going to be in the playoffs, whether or not do you know what? I think the fact that also let me just add the fact that he's another receiver who's had to play with multiple quarterbacks. Like the fact that Odell Beckham, Eli Manning never misses the game. It's a bargain about Odell Beckham. Eli Manning never misses the game, so Odell Beckham's going to have the same chemistry with the same quarterback over and over again, and he's able to keep it's the same rhythm. I think the likes of players like AJ Green have shown that regardless of what quarterback's on the center, they're still going to be able to produce, and we've seen that. We've seen the way he's combined with AJ McCarron, who's had to replace the injured Andy Dalton. So and that's another thing that's given the edge. I've given the edge to AJ Green over Odell Beckham. That's nothing. That's no slight on Odell Beckham. Like I said before, he's still a very, very good receiver. But I just think players like AJ Green have that more than him. And number 4 is Des Bryant. I mentioned earlier how he and Brandon Marshall are tied for the most touchdowns since 2012. And this is Des Bryant, who's spent a lot of the season injured. I think he broke his foot in week 1, and he's just never been the same. He's never been the same. I think he's struggled to return to fitness, but the fact that coming back, he's still demanded double teams. Teams have still schemed against him. Give him a double coverage, because even with a busted foot, Des Bryant can still produce the incredible. He's definitely not going to be high in this list in terms of catches and touchdowns, because he's missed so much time. But I think next season, if we have, once with a healthy Des Bryant, we'll be able to see, like performance from years gone by. In years gone by, Des Bryant has lit up the stat sheets, and as I said already, for a player who's tied for what do we call it for? Sorry, tied for most touchdowns, so it says a lot. And he's another one who's had to play with different. Not only has he had to play with different quarterbacks, he's also had to endure not being fit. He's not being fit. He's undergone a series of different on top of his broken foot, a series of different injuries. So he's not quite been as bright of old. And I just hope that he can come back next season and just, I think, try just be the guy that we once saw. I think, like I said, as I did with Jordy Nelson, I was able to just use his previous seasons as the benchmark. Like we already saw, like in 2014, he amassed 1,300 to 1,300 yards and 15 yards per reception, and he scored 16 touchdowns in one season. That's a lot. And obviously, since entering the league, his stats has improved from 6 to 9 to 10 to 12 to 16 touchdowns. So he's always increased the amount of touchdowns he scores per season. Apart from last season where he was injured, only amassed 9, but that's still no mean feat. Do you know what I mean? So I think being fourth on this list is justifiable for a player like Bryant. I think next season with Romo fit and Bryant fit, I think the Cowboys, who we saw how the NFC East panned out with losing two of your best players, will kill your season. Not only did they lose their franchise quarterback, they lost their franchise receiver. So you've lost two of your best players for a majority, for big spells in the season, and you were still in it within the last with 3 games to go. It just shows how important a piece he and Tony Romo were. But moving on to number 3, and this is where I think people will disagree. I think, especially with the fact that I've had Odell Beckham at number 6, I'm putting DeAndre Hopkins at number 3. I think Hopkins is amazing. I think I've been noticing even ever since Hopkins came to the league, I've been saying to myself, this guy is a really good receiver. Is a really, really. Let me just say one thing. DeAndre Hopkins has had 4 different quarterbacks this season, and of all 4 of those 4 quarterbacks, not one of them is someone you can say, you know what, this is a very good quarterback. This is a quarterback I want for my team. He's had Ryan Mallett, he's had Brian Hoyer, like Case Keenum, and he's had Brandon Whedon, all throw passes for him. And you think already that was a tough task already, but he still managed to amass over 1,500 yards. He scored 11 touchdowns and had 13.7 yards per reception. And sometimes you got to ask yourself, how is that even possible? He's the only player in NFL history to have 100 yards to have 4 100-yard games with 4 different receivers. So with all of those, 4 different quarterbacks. Sorry, with all of those quarterbacks on the center, he still managed to amass 100 yards, at least 100-yard game with every single one of them. And even when you watch him, what he did to the Roy Rivers is maybe on the decline, but he's still one of the top quarterbacks in this game. What he did to Roy Rivers was not fair. And he's that kind of player. He demands so much respect. And I keep saying it because maybe, like AJ Green does, maybe because he plays in Houston, he doesn't command the same respect that other receivers would. And you start to kind of realize, you start to kind of, when you do watch his kind of like highlight reels or, spectacular, you start to realize, just how good he is. And I think he's only going to get better. It's a player who I think any quarterback would love to have. And I think not only that, we saw he's pretty humble. He's not, he obviously all receivers have an ego, but he's only 3 years into his career, and he's already demanding the applaud of a lot of skeptics, a lot of journalists around the world, a lot of pundits around the world, and a lot of his fellow receivers. And I think next, if the Texans can acquire a better quarterback than they've had this season, than the better standard quarterback they've had this season, and also be able to keep that quarterback fit, I think this team's going to do good things with someone like DeAndre. They have DeAndre Hopkins, they have J.J. Watt, they have Javen Crowley, and they have Arian Foster. They have all the pieces on this team there, apart from a quarterback. So he's part of something special. They even forgot players that like Joseph Friendly and Brian Cushing. Like, this team is on paper has amazing pieces. They have everything but a franchise quarterback. And I think amongst their pieces, I think he's probably behind JJ Watt, probably the most important piece on the team, and that says it all. Moving on to number three, number two. Now you've got to know we've got two more players left on this list. You're going to realize that Calvin Johnson probably isn't going to make the top 10. I know you're probably thinking, how is that possible? One of the, how can one of the best receivers over the last 10 years not make the top 10? Now, I watched Calvin Johnson play. Now, he's somewhat flat to deceive the season. I think old age has finally hit him. I think he's definitely still one of the top receivers in this league, but I don't think he has top 10 talent anymore. You might find that really, really controversial, but I do not think that Calvin Johnson has top 10 talent anymore. I personally think that his decline has hit him faster, than I expected. So Calvin Johnson isn't going to be in the top 10, and I know that some people, may not agree with me, but that's just how I see it. He's still a very good receiver, but these younger players are just playing better than him. I've seen him perform this season. On any odd game, I've seen him, dominate, but there's been too many games where he's just not been as dominant before, and that's why he's not in this list. So at number two, I'm going to give you Julio Jones. Now, all you got to do is just search Julio Jones highlight reel, and you'll see the things that he's done. He amassed 1,800 yards this season. 1,800 yards. And fair enough, he may not have caught as many touchdowns as he should have, but that's more down to the ineptitude of Matt Ryan as opposed to Julio Jones himself. Julio Jones has been, this is a player who's suffered injuries this season. He's not as points at a season where he's not been 100%, but he still managed, to amass so many yards in one season. And he's one of those players who's insanely hard to prepare for. I remember watching against the Packers, when he played against the Packers, how he pretty much he almost won the game one-handedly. Came up just short. But I think that performance alone, especially away at Lambeau Field, away from a dome, which he's so used to playing in, just shows you just how beastly this player can be. And when the Falcons gave up so much just to go up and draft him, people were asking whether it was worth it or not. It really was worth it. They may have not, gone all the way and won the Super Bowl. They've had chances, which have had chances to do, but regardless, he is the only bright spark on that team. Well, maybe apart from the running back, but he is a player that demands so much respect that you can't do things that, living in what you want to one, in man coverage, leaving 1-on-1 against one corner. Even I don't care whether it is Darrell Reeves or Richard Sherman. The player that demands so much respect that you've got to double cover him, and even regardless, then he still manages to to blow coverage open and just produce some spectacular catches. He's just amazing, and I can't wait to see him next year and see how he does 2 years into the Dan Quinn experience. Like this season, the Falcons were just really, really poor. Where they were nothing. But I think in a game like the game against the Panthers, where they stopped the Panthers on being run, it just showed you just how much of a beast this guy was. How he hurt the Panthers. Like that catch, that catch going downfield when he beat Luke Kuechly, and I forgot who the second DB was, and the other DB was. But that catch there just shows you just how much of a beast he is. That regardless whoever you put on him, he'll just be able to dominate. And it's almost an impossible task. So yeah, Julio Jones, most receptions in this league. Obviously, not as many touchdowns, but still a beastly, a beast of a player. And that brings me to number one. Now, it was, I think it was a toss up between him and Julio Jones. I thought to put Julio Jones number one and this player two, but at the end of the day, I think what swayed it for me was the way. It's just the way he dominated against the Broncos. So I think I put Antonio Brown number one. Like against I think it was against the Broncos. He had a game where he just dominated. It was both Hakeem Talib and Harris that he dominated both of them. I think Harris hadn't allowed no touchdowns up until that point in 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. And Antonio Brown taught him a lesson. Antonio Brown not only almost single-handedly brought the Heaters back into the game, but he literally, I think he taught that secondary a lesson that you can't cover me. And it's Antonio Brown is a player who's got so much that his open field speed is something that's scary. I think if you give him a sniff and you give him a sniff, like a square patch of grass, green grass, he's gone. You're not going to catch him. We've seen it over and over again. Seen it over and over again. He may not have caught as many touchdowns as other receivers may have, but that's because he had Le'Veon Bell. And he also, DeAndre Williams came in and and showed that he was capable of taking the load. And he's got other players like Martavis Bryant in his team, and he has there are other targets at the Steelers, just not just Antonio Brown. But regardless, Antonio Brown is so good that he's able to command a double team regardless of the other weapons and that he has. He makes his teammates better. He's almost like Jordan Nelson. He makes double teammates better because he tracks so much attention. He opens up the field to other players, and the Steelers are able to. The Steelers are just able to, to attack teams, especially in the air. And in coming into the playoffs, especially in the AFC, I think the Steelers probably have the best offensive weapons because of Brown. Yeah, they have the best offensive weapon left in the playoffs, especially in the AFC side. So Antonio Brown, I think, is just about the best receiver in the league. I think you can argue between him and Julio Jones, but I don't think you can bring in anybody else as close to these two players. These two players play at a level which is scary. The way they dominate secondaries and the way they're able to exploit mistakes is something I don't see as much in other players that are doing them. So Antonio Brown is the best receiver. In my opinion, is the best receiver in the league. So let me just go through the 10-1. 10, you got Allen Robinson. 9, you got Demaryius Thomas. 8, you got Brandon Marshall. 7, you got Jordan Nelson. 6, you got Odell Beckham Jr. 5, you got AJ Green. At 4, you got Des Bryant. At 3, you have DeAndre Hopkins. At 2, you got Julio Jones. And at number 1, you got the Pittsburgh Steelers, Marvel, Antonio Brown. I know some of you will not agree with this list, but I'd want you to give me some feedback on and tell me what you think. So just want to thank you for listening to the podcast, and there's probably going to be one about the playoffs coming up soon. So, but I do hope you enjoy postseason football, and once again, thank you for listening.